They thought I wouldn't notice my inheritance was gone. You've probably heard the saying, you never really know someone until you share an inheritance with them. I used to think that was just a bitter, cynical joke. Now, I know it's the God-honest truth. I always treated my in-laws like they were my own family, giving them all the love and respect I gave my own parents. In return, they betrayed me in the most complete and devastating way you can imagine. They didn't just shatter our family, they shattered my ability to ever truly trust anyone again. This is the story of how I found out they had secretly, methodically, and without a shred of remorse, stolen every last penny of my inheritance. I was standing in front of the empty safe, my hands trembling, when I heard my mother-in-law's cheerful voice call out from the kitchen, "Dinner's almost ready, dear." She had no idea that I knew. She had no clue that the comfortable life she'd built on a mountain of lies was about to come crashing down around her. And that I was the one holding the hammer. To understand how we got there, to that moment right on the edge of it all blowing up, we have to go back 10 years. Back to a time when I still believed in family. My husband, Mark, and I had what I really thought was a storybook romance. We met in college, and I knew from our first date he was the one. He was kind, he was ambitious, and his family. Well, his family was everything I'd ever wanted. My own parents, who I adored, lived all the way across the country, so Mark's parents, Richard and Susan, became my surrogate family. They lived just a few towns away, and from the second Mark introduced us, they welcomed me with open arms. Susan, my mother-in-law, was the perfect matriarch, always ready with a warm hug and a home-cooked meal. She'd call me just to chat, asking about my day, remembering little details about my job, and just making me feel so seen and cherished. Richard, my father-in-law, was the quiet one, but he had this gentle smile that always reached his eyes. He was a retired accountant, and he and Susan lived a comfortable, but not flashy life. They doted on Mark, their only son, and by extension, they doted on me. For years, our lives were just this beautiful pattern of Sunday dinners, holidays, and vacations together. When my own mother passed away after a long illness, it was Susan who held me while I sobbed. She brought over casseroles for a week, cleaned my house, and just sat with me in the silence when I felt completely alone. And when my dad died just 2 years later, totally heartbroken without the love of his life, Richard was the one who helped me sort through the confusing maze of paperwork. He sat with me for hours, patiently explaining every single estate document. My parents weren't rich, but they were smart, careful planners. They had worked hard their whole lives, saving and investing so they could leave something behind for me, their only child. Their legacy was a modest house, some stocks, and a life insurance policy that added up to about $500,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was theirs. It was the sum of all their love and sacrifice. It was meant to be my safety net, my future. A final gift. Right in the middle of all that pain, Richard offered to manage the inheritance for me. "You're grieving, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with fatherly concern. "The last thing you need to be worrying about is financial portfolios and tax stuff. Let me handle the heavy lifting. I'll set up a secure trust for you. We'll put it all in a safe place, let it grow, and it'll be there whenever you need it." I was so exhausted by grief that his offer felt like a lifeline. I trusted him completely. I mean, he was Mark's dad. He was the man who held my hand at my own father's funeral. He was a retired accountant. Who could possibly be more trustworthy? So, I agreed. I signed the papers he put in front of me, the ones he said would create the Elara Trust to be managed for my benefit. I just remember feeling this wave of gratitude. I thought, wow, how lucky am I to have in-laws who would step in and protect me during the worst time of my life. I gave them access. I gave them control. And I didn't think about it again for 5 years. That was my first and biggest mistake. I thought the trust was just sitting there, a quiet symbol of my parents' love and my in-laws' kindness. I couldn't have been more wrong. Life went on. Mark and I decided it was finally time to buy our dream home. We'd been saving like crazy, but the market was tough, and we needed a big down payment. "This is it," I told Mark one night, scrolling through listings. "This is exactly what my parents wanted. For their gift to give us a real start." Mark was just as excited as I was. The next morning, Feeling hopeful, I called Richard. "Hi, Richard," I said cheerfully. "Mark and I are finally ready to buy a house, and we'd like to use the trust for the down payment. Can you help me figure out the process?" There was a pause. It only lasted a second, but it felt heavy. "A house," Richard said, his voice suddenly strained. "That's a big step. Are you sure you're ready for that?" His reaction threw me. "Of course we are. We've been planning this for years. I just need to know how to get the funds." "Well, it's complicated, Elara," he stammered. "The market took a bit of a hit a few years ago. It's not a great time to withdraw. We should probably wait for it to recover." A cold knot formed in my stomach. My dad had taught me a little about investing, and I kept an eye on the markets. They hadn't been that bad. "What do you mean, not a great time?" "Richard, I need a straight answer. How much is in the trust?" He was so evasive, throwing around vague numbers and financial jargon that just felt designed to confuse me. He talked about market volatility, capital gains, anything and everything except a simple answer. The call ended with him promising to get the paperwork together and call me back. He never did. A week passed. Then 2. My calls to Richard started going straight to voicemail. When I asked Susan about it, she was just as cagey. "Oh, you know Richard," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively. "He gets so wrapped up in his numbers. He's just being overly cautious. He wants what's best for you." But she wouldn't look me in the eye. I saw a flicker of something in her face. Was it panic? Guilt? That's when I knew. It wasn't even a real thought, just a gut feeling. Something was very, very wrong. My first call was to the bank where my dad originally had his accounts. After a long verification process, a kind manager put me on hold. When she came back on the line, her tone was different. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "our records show those funds were transferred out over 4 years ago. The account was closed." The blood drained from my face. Closed? Transferred where? "To an account under the name RS Investments," she replied. RS. Richard and Susan. My heart was pounding as I drove to their house. I kept telling myself I had to be wrong, that there was a simple explanation. They weren't home when I got there. Mark had a spare key, and this sick, desperate need to know just pulled me inside. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I ended up in Richard's home office. His desk was perfectly neat. But in the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old tax returns, was a file folder labeled simply Elara. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open it. Inside were bank statements. Not for a trust in my name, but for a brokerage account in their names. And the transaction history was like a punch to the gut. It started with one huge deposit 5 years ago, for the exact amount of my inheritance. What came after was a detailed story of their betrayal. There were withdrawals. Thousands at a time. A $50,000 payment to a luxury car dealership. A $75,000 wire transfer to a European cruise line. Monthly payments to a fancy country club I didn't even know they belonged to. They had been systematically draining my parents' life savings to live this lavish life they passed off as a well-planned retirement. The sheer scale of the lie was breathtaking. The cozy Sunday dinners, the concerned phone calls, Susan's comforting hugs. All of it was a performance. They weren't caring for me, they were fattening up their golden goose. They were thieves hiding behind the masks of loving parents. The trust, the protection, the advice, it was a scam from the start. They had used my grief and my trust as a weapon against me. I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was a physical pain, sharp and suffocating. It was never just about the money. It was the violation. They had taken my parents' final gift, the one thing left in the world that was purely from them, and pissed it away on cruises and cars. They had danced on my parents' graves. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart, you know the pain is so much bigger than the act itself. It's like a wound to your very soul. If you believe that karma gets to everyone in the end, I want you to stick around. You're going to want to see what happened next. I just sat there on the floor of their office, the papers spread all around me. I don't know for how long. I was just numb. When I finally stood up, I felt like a robot. I took out my phone and I photographed every single document. Every statement, every withdrawal, every receipt. I built a digital trail of their crime while my mind went from shocked and grieving to cold and clear. A glacial rage started to set in. When I got home, Mark found me sitting in the dark. I didn't say a word. He just took one look at my face and knew. I spread the evidence out on our dining room table. He sank into a chair, his face completely ashen as he looked at the proof of his parents' theft. And he just started to cry. Not loud sobs, but the quiet, broken tears of a man whose entire world had just been obliterated. "There has to be a mistake," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "There's no mistake, Mark," I said, my own voice flat and empty. "They stole it. All of it. They used my love for them against me. They used my grief to get rich." The next 24 hours were a nightmare of horrible conversations. Mark wanted so badly to believe there was an explanation. He called them, begging them to tell him it wasn't true. And they lied. They lied right to their own son's face. They made up some story about a bad investment, a catastrophic loss they were too ashamed to tell us about. But the papers I held in my hand told a very different story. Not one bad investment, but hundreds of selfish ones. That evening, I drove back to their house. Alone. Mark begged me not to go, to let him handle it, but I couldn't. This was my fight. This was for my parents. I walked in without knocking. They were in the living room, watching TV. Susan smiled when she saw me, that same practiced warm smile that now looked disgusting. "Ilara, dear. What a surprise. Are you staying for dinner?" That was it. That casual, cheerful, fraudulent sentence just broke me. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. Susan's smile faltered. "Where is what, honey?" "Don't call me that," I snapped. The sharpness in my own voice seemed to shock all three of us. "My inheritance. The money my parents left for me. The money you stole. Where is it?" Richard jumped up from his chair. "Now, Ilara, that is a serious accusation. We told Mark there was a bad investment." "Stop lying." I screamed, the rage finally exploding out of me. I threw the file folder onto the coffee table between us, the papers spilling out like a waterfall of their greed. A bad investment? Was the Mercedes a bad investment? The 2-week Mediterranean cruise? The country club membership? The designer clothes Susan wears? Was it all just one big 5-year-long bad investment? They just stared at the papers, their faces shifting from fake innocence to the pale, cornered look of fear. Susan started to tremble. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "They were caught. How could you?" I whispered, the anger suddenly replaced by the raw, aching wound underneath. "How could you do this? Susan, you held me when my mother died. Richard, you told me you would protect me. Was it all a lie? Right from the start?" Susan started crying, but they were real tears this time. Tears of pure self-pity. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. "We were just going to borrow a little. To help us out. We always meant to pay it back." I actually laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. "Pay it back? You spent $500,000. You were never going to pay it back. You were just hoping I'd never ask. You thought I was stupid. You thought I wouldn't notice." The fight devolved into a mess of pathetic excuses. They had debts. They felt they deserved a little comfort. They figured I had Mark to take care of me. Every word was just another shovel of dirt on the grave of the family I thought I had. The worst part was seeing what it did to Mark. He was torn in two. He loved his parents, but he loved me, and he knew what they had done was unforgivable. In that moment, he had to choose. And he chose me. He looked at his parents, his face a mask of disgust. "You will pay her back," he said, his voice shaking with a rage I had never heard from him before. "Every single penny. You will sell the car. You will sell this house. You will liquidate everything. I don't care how. You will make this right." Of course, they couldn't. The money was gone. Spent on luxuries and memories that had turned to ash in our mouths. We walked out of that house and we never went back. The legal battle was ugly. We sued them for fraud. They were forced into a settlement that left them with almost nothing, but it was still just a fraction of what they'd stolen. The financial loss was huge, but the emotional damage was total. We didn't just lose the money, we lost our family. Mark lost his parents. All those memories of laughter and belonging were now poisoned, exposed as a lie. The damage was permanent. It's been 2 years since that night. We never did buy our dream house. The settlement money sits in a new, secure trust, managed by a stranger at a bank. Someone I pay to be trustworthy because I can't give that trust away for free anymore. We moved to a new city to get away from the ghosts of our old life. Mark and I are still together, and I guess the fire of this betrayal forged our bond even stronger, but there's a sadness between us that I'm afraid will never really go away. He mourns the parents he thought he had, and I mourn the innocent, trusting person I used to be. The betrayal didn't just steal my inheritance, it stole my sense of safety in the world. I learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the people with the brightest smiles have the darkest secrets, and they won't hesitate to use your love against you. Recovery isn't about getting the money back. It's about learning to live with the scars. It's about finding the strength to rebuild your life on a new foundation, one built not on blind faith, but on cautious, hard-won wisdom. They thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. And in the process, I lost a family, but I found a strength in myself I never knew I had. The aftermath of family betrayal is a long and lonely road. If you've ever been through something like this, please share your story or a word of encouragement in the comments. Let's build a community of support for each other, because no one should have to walk this path alone.